Um, when I was here a year ago, you did mention very strongly that we're going to face some truly challenging times exogenous to us, and that the external environment was certainly going to deteriorate, and that we would need to ensure that we have a game plan so that we could deal with the emerging situation. What has happened is exactly that. And a year later, we are right, I don't know whether we are in the middle of it, perhaps worse yet to come. They are talking of further increases in the US interest rates, which will certainly take up global borrowing rates. You see, when in the good times, we borrowed commercially. From about 2007, 8, when LIBOR fell from around 5.5, close to 6, to 0.5%. Right? In that window, in QE window, we just borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. And nobody can deny that. The numbers show that we went on a borrowing spree. We fueled our economy on a total debt. Now what did we produce? Non-tradables, stadiums, and I don't want to go on. We know what we did. It's not bringing us any revenue to meet these huge debt obligations. So if you look at the growth, quarterly growth, I have from 2011, 10% almost, 7%, 9%, 6%, 7%. 2012 quarter 1, 16%. Quarter 2, 10%. Quarter 3, 5%. Quarter 4, 12%. Sorry, 7%. And suddenly, it comes 2013 and boom, everything falls. 2013 quarter 4, we fall to 0.5%. So it was in that short window that we saw this massive debt fuel growth, which was certainly unsustainable, right? But if that money was used to enhance the tradable sector, if we use that money to improve productivity and do what we now have to do into the future to sustain whatever growth that we can get, then the situation today would have been different. There is no way in which the government in 2.5 years, 3 years can ratchet up so much of debt that it suddenly becomes the fault of the current government. It certainly is not. And I have to say this as a member of this government, that of course it is our responsibility to ensure that whichever government borrowed these large amounts of money at relatively high rates will have to be repaid, right? So then you fall to 0.5, and then suddenly you have a spurt in the fourth quarter of 2014 of almost 11% growth just before election, and that we all know was election expenditure. And then we are now in 6 quarters, like you said, of sub 4% growth. Now sub 4% growth is not good, because it doesn't help the regular person, whether it is in the city or in the village, to be able to sort of see their dreams come true. At the end of the day, every mother wants her son and daughter to do well. Every married young couple wants to build a house, and they have big dreams, right? So, as a politician, what is it that we are trying to do to help people make those dreams, for them to make those dreams a reality? I am saying that every government since 48 attempted to do that. There was no president in this country or prime minister who didn't want that. But it's just that the way people went about it, some succeeded to some level, others failed to some level. And the fact of the matter is that overall, in this last 70 years, we haven't achieved much. And therefore, one has to look at this country's economy beyond the short 3 years or who is in office. We have to look at what happened to this country over the last 70 years. And that we live beyond our means. That this country has been running deficits ever since. I think except for 2 years since independence, we've been running deficits. And of course at the beginning, where there was no private sector, the government had to do everything. And when the reforms happened, the government had to bring the money. There were no public-private partnerships. There was no FDI. The government had to borrow. And the government borrowed. The government of the time built the Mahavali, did the port, and all that. That enhanced productivity, and that sustained some growth. And opening up of the economy helped to get to where we are today. Just imagine if that was also squandered and built unnecessary infrastructure used on subsidy after subsidy, we would be in a much worse position than today. So we have to acknowledge that, right? But going forward, I think we need not be stuck in the short term what's happening. But as a nation, we have to be able to come together to decide as to what is the policy that we need in order to sustain this country. Otherwise, I'm sorry, we are all going to be in deep trouble. Because the situation that we are in today is not a rosy one. I mean, there is no, need to sugarcoat this. We are facing some enormous challenges, right? So, then, as Mr. Vijayawardena said today in his column, there's enough of blame game. I think we need to agree as to what we need to do as a nation, right? And in the short term, okay, you talked about import restrictions and all that. I made a comment on my Facebook. I haven't. Right now, people are saying, look, then it is going to be legislated. Right? I mean, as a nation, we have to think like a nation. If we are in a spot of bother, we have to think as a nation. We cannot be divided by cheap political rhetoric and pure vote catching, but agree that this is what this country has to do. Right? And Dr. Sandaratna's piece yesterday in the Times, he said the story that this economy is about to collapse is a colossal overstatement. A colossal overstatement. It is true, this economy is not about to collapse just because there's been some depreciation of the currency. Of course, there have been some countries that has had significant depreciations in the currency that has sort of readjusted the real exchange rates, and you've seen long-term deficits in the current account turn into long-term surpluses in the current account. And countries like Thailand and others, there is evidence to suggest that. But I'm not going to go there. But the point is that that these short-term adjustments is purely short-term. You cannot turn the fortunes of the country around by importing less or putting LC margins to 200%. These are just temporary plasters to manage the current situation. So therefore, what do we do? What you said, Dushni, you said on the positive side, better public finance and prudent monetary and exchange rate management, turnaround in exports and FDI. So I just looked at what the current status is on the fiscal side. You know, we are running January to July 2018, 0.3% of GDP primary account balance. Now that shows you that if this was a company, it's making some operational profit. Right? So if you sort of look at how the Treasury has been managing the fiscal side, I mean, I think they've done a pretty decent job, right? So what is hammering us is not what's happening on the day-to-day basis. What is hammering us is the interest that we have to pay, and then of course then we go to a current account deficit of 1% and overall budget balance of negative 3.2% to August 2018. So it is the overhang that is restricting us from doing even better on the fiscal side. Total expenditure has been maintained at the rates that we expected, forecasted to do at the beginning of the year. Then prudent monetary and exchange rate management. We've had below 10% inflation for, I was just checking the other day, 117 months. I mean, that's good work by the central bank for 117 months to have inflation at these levels. And even when we had a supply side problem due to the weather, when food inflation went to something like 14%, we still was able to manage overall inflation at 5-6%, and inflation dropped to about 2% a few months ago. Now it's edging back up a bit, but I am certain that the central bank would do what it has to mitigate on the demand side and ensure that there is stability of the price stability continuing into the future. On the exchange rate management, I'm not going to talk much because everybody's been talking about it. There's been so much written about it. But I slightly differ with Dushni's point as to whether we should sterilize more or less the intervention in the forex market. As you now see, is the overnight call money rates have almost hit the ceiling at 8.5%. So at 8.5%, if it is hitting the ceiling, if you're not injecting money at less than 8.5%, then I think that's all right. I mean, there's really no need currently to perhaps increase your policy rates, but at least let the policy rates or at least let the overnight rates be within the higher band or higher margin, at the top margin of the policy rate, I think is prudent. We have to manage aggregate demand. That's what we need to do. So, you put a 200% LC margin on car, or you have to you have to pay cash to buy a fridge. Okay, these are small things. But if you are able to control aggregate demand, that is when you are able to really address the problem. So the way to address that issue is through interest rates. And of course, it is certainly going to have a negative impact on growth. But but that is what we have to give up to have some sort of stability on the exchange rate. So this is a debate that is going on. I trust the economists at the central bank. I'm sure thinking about this and trying to balance the two sides. And I'm happy at the way it has turned out. I don't know what happened to the rupee today, but I know on Friday it appreciated by 0.5%. So perhaps, like I said, unless someone knows, perhaps we can discuss it in the panel. But there may have been some panic, and certainly there was quite a bit of speculation, and those contributed perhaps to an overshooting of the depreciation, because there is no real reason the rupee has to depreciate to these 170 plus levels. There doesn't seem to be any fundamental reason suddenly for this to happen. And I think some reports in the press also contributed to the panic, even though a highly regarded research firm made a huge mistake in reporting our short-term debt. But these things happen. But there has been, I'm saying that there was quite a bit of speculation and panic. Then on the negative side, you talked about weak growth, high debt, and the currency turmoil. So in total, what we are seeing is a problem that we have to address, not using short-term measures, but using medium to long-term decisions. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And what are those things? And that's where you very correctly point out in your report, which I saw yesterday, the first two chapters, productivity enhancing reforms to what you say lift medium term growth outlook. So I think that's the fundamental issue. What do we have to do? What do we have to do? And also note that your theme is most apt, and that is about weather, climate change, and this is something we in government, I mean, we always think disaster is a disaster, it happens once in a way, right? The probability of a disaster happening is, small, but the probability of a disaster happening is becoming high. And we've seen 6 seasons of crop being destroyed. And we just heard this morning's news on this channel in the radio, I heard, that they started giving out 5,000 rupee bags to tens of thousands of people in the Anuradhapur area. Of course, Polonnaruwa tanks are filled to the brim. It's beautiful to see. Wickramasinghe, I was talking to an MP, I was there the previous weekend, and he said, I'm 40 years old, I've never seen Wickramasinghe filled with so much of water. And so not only the rainfalls have been good, there's enough rain, but the water coming to Wickramasinghe and through the cascading lake system, tank system going to the other agricultural areas is going to be a huge benefit in the agricultural areas in that part of the country. But there is water in Polonnaruwa, there is no water in Anuradhapur, there is no water in Portland. They see the worst outcomes in Portland. So the government has to put a lot of money in order to deal with the post-disaster issues. And the other two challenges, first one I don't want to talk about now is external politics. You all know what's happening, external politics. Trump and all these trade wars and all that. We have, no way to stop him, tweeting in the night. Whatever he tweets. But internal politics, right? So the coalition politics is certainly not easy. It is difficult. We are more liberal in our approach to economics. The UNP is. UNP has always been. Whether it is in the 77 reforms. I mean, what did we do in 77? We opened up, we reformed the financial sector, we reformed the investment sector, right? And then we reformed trade. We built the export processing zones at the port, and we gave money for people to start businesses, and we got foreign direct investment, and that's how the engine got started. That's how it got started. But of course, over the years, we didn't really have the courage to continue the reforms that we should have done. But our coalition partner traditionally has not been so positive towards liberalization. Our coalition partner has over the years been more inward looking, and therefore there is certainly a policy conflict, and we need to overcome that. And if you leave it to a coterie of lobbyists who say don't open, then we are not going to make it. We better understand that, right? And if vested interest is going to come up on top than the national interest, we are going to miss this bus once again. If somebody says, make it more difficult for FDI, why would you want to make it difficult for FDI? Because somebody would say, well, if he sets up a factory here, I might lose my market share. Therefore, put up a barrier and tell them no FDI, even though there is no incentive given to that person to set up a plant in Sri Lanka. Or somebody might say, or do not liberalize the shipping sector. I have had this share in the agency business for X number of years. I intend to keep it for Y number of years. And therefore, do not open this. I was in Dhaka for 24 hours. I was shocked at the amount of reforms that is taking place in Bangladesh. You see? And they are talking about building a 18-meter draft port in Chittagong or somewhere there. India's changed their cabotage laws. So foreign vessels can transship out of, Jawaharlal Nehru port or wherever port it is. There are so many ports on the eastern coast of India opening up. So if we say, look, we have a lobby, and that lobby says don't open, so therefore we will not open, then we are going to say bye-bye to that business also. East container terminal. For a number of years now, it is there with no ships, no containers, no cranes. Is it necessary for the government to put money there? Or should we put money elsewhere? I'm very happy. Yesterday I went to see my father. I go to see him once a week. And sitting with him, he was saying, he was looking at the Sunday Times, and I said, this headline, Karthi, is what I did. I said, really? What is this? And I said, look, let's look at the data, right? One of the analysts who did it is sitting right there, or two of them. Look at the data. What are we spending money on capital expenditure? We are spending money, bulk of it, 65-70%, to build buildings for schools, hostels. Now, why does the government have to build buildings? come from private sector money. Do we have to use our very little resources? We have very little space to borrow. We are already hitting limits. Can't we instead have a lease purchase or rent purchase program and instead put the money to where we need the money now? Put the money now. We can take a lease purchase over 15 years and they can go to the bank, use the agreement with the school or the university, whichever it may be, and say, look, I have an agreement. Over the next 15 years, I get paid. Or else, like Dr. Amunakama said, Harsha, why don't we add some concession there? Give a little bit of land and let them build a supermarket or something like that. And that way, our payout is going to be much less. And they'll build the school or university dormitory, and we will have it. And instead, what do we do with the money? We put the money into STEM education. So I called it from bricks to microscopes. It was something that our office, we phrased, from bricks to microscopes. Because that is the kind of reform we have to do. Right? I mean, this is the productivity enhancing reform that you talk about in your report, Dushni. Right? The human capital. I don't understand from where else we are going to get the growth. Look at our productivity. I mean, some countries have increased the number of people that work in the economy. So you have quantitatively increasing labor and you have growth. Or you have more capital put in, you have growth. Right? So labor productivity, if you look at it and look at total factor productivity, what is that? I mean, that is coming from better efficient use and technology infusion. So at our stage of growth, of course we have a window of more women coming into the labor force. We have only 35% of the women in the labor force. So there is some window there. Right? But really, growth will have to come from the kind of productivity increases that will be sustained over a period so that we can have a structural shift in this growth of our country from whatever it is, 4.5% to 8%. So to do that, we have to have I'm not going to take much time. I think I'm now done. I will 3-4 minutes and I'll stop. I'm getting carried away because you see, we have to address the real issue. There's no point beating around the bush. Today the rupee will depreciate a little bit, it can appreciate. In Singapore, the rupee appreciated like today's Vijay's article showed. From some 38 cents or something to 78 cents to the dollar. Right? So their problem is how to stop the appreciation. We can do that, but we have to do what we have to do now. So therefore, one of the main things is higher quality and quantity of infrastructure that is absolutely necessary. Right? Then the biggest thing, of course, is trade openness. I'm not going to repeat the story about Parakrama Bahu and Alam Setu, but I've said it over and over again. But however many times I repeat that story is true, that story is real. Right? We were always a trade emporium. Right? And if we are going to be scared of competition and build more walls around this country, we're dead. We're dead. Right? Because we're dead. I mean, Sri Lanka has always been in the center of the Indian Ocean. Right? Just being at the center of the Indian Ocean doesn't mean a damn thing. Unless you leverage it. So that is why, if you want to create an economic center here, and we also need to work on the diplomatic side as well. So that's why we are quite happy that we were able to host this very important meeting Thursday, Friday. We were able to bring very senior officials from India, China, and America and talk about the Indian Ocean, a rules-based order for freedom of navigation and the use of this Indian Ocean. So we have to be punching above our weight class as an island at the center of the ocean. If the ocean is going to be a sort of path to progress, and that trade is going to be something that we are going to leverage, right? And we are going to create an economy that is more tradable than non-tradable, right? And then on the other side of that coin is to make sure that people see us, look at us as an important player in this strategic game that will be played in this ocean in the next 20 years, right? So the opportunity exists. It's just we have to take that opportunity on and deliver. So a few other things I'm just going to list out. Tax and expenditure policy. You know, I'm a little bit frustrated too on some of the tax policies. I'll be quite open, because I've said this to the minister and to the prime minister and to the president, that we need better, more conducive tax policies. I don't see any reason why we should tax NRFC when we are having a issue with currency. These kinds of taxes must be removed immediately. And I said it even today, and I'm sure it will be removed, right? And also, what a lot of people don't realize is the kind of incentives that we are given for investment, the capital allowance. Like if you invest $1 million in Jaffna, for instance, you don't have to pay any taxes until you make $3 million in profits. We haven't communicated that properly. If you invest $1 million outside of the northern province, you pay no tax. And let me repeat that. You pay no tax until you make $2 million of profit. So if you look at it from a tax holiday kind of lens, you're looking at about 7-8 years of tax holiday. And I'll tell you what's coming also. And land is currently not. So I'm hoping that land will also become part of the calculation of the investment in the capital allowance. So these are fantastic opportunities, right? And we have now created the national export strategy, and they identified a whole bunch of things that people can invest in, and a lot of other reforms are taking place. Immigration reforms in immigration, making sure that we have the kind of people we need to have in this country, because all our people are leaving and we don't want anybody to come, right? And that is not going to help us if you are going to build human capital. And productivity improvements is what we really require to sustain the growth. So I think I'm boring you, so I will stop. But to end, I congratulate you, Dushni, for being bold and saying as it is. This is what we need. We need constructive criticism, without which we're just going to be led, down the wrong path. So once again, thank you for the opportunity, and let us all think like a country. Let us all think like a nation. I think there is no more necessity to blame. Everybody is to blame for where we are today. There's no single person or political party. Right? We are all to blame. Right? So we can continue to do this, but there is no point. So let's all think as a nation, do the reforms we have to do, liberalize this economy, bring in the capital that we require so that we can repay this gigantic debt that we have and get out of this hole, and hopefully before I die, we'll be able to enjoy the fruits of these comments that I made today. Thank you very much.